Now, as Australia's new Prime Minister Scott Morrison comes to the end of his first week in the top job, many are reflecting on the culture in Parliament. The Liberals' Julia Banks announced that she will not contest the next election after experiencing what she describes as bullying and intimidation from both major parties.
But others, including federal Liberal MP Craig Kelly, are disappointed in Ms Banks' decision. To discuss this and more, we're talking with Craig Kelly and Labor MP Pat Conroy. Welcome to both of you.
Good morning.
Yeah, great to be here.
Craig, so a week on, was it all worth it?
Well, it's certainly been a tough week. Scott Morrison's taken, I think, on the job as new Prime Minister of our country. I think he's taken on well. First trip over Indonesia's gone fantastically. Great reception over there. There's been a slight reset in some of the policy areas, and we'll push on to the next election.
But you have taken a huge hit in the polls, which is no surprise. How on earth do you recover in time for the next election?
Well, let's just see what happens. Those polls we've seen over the last number of years, they can be very fluctuating. The vote moves around very quickly in small periods. Let's see what happens over the next couple of months.
Pat, we will get to you in just a moment, but Craig, as we mentioned, Julia Banks is not going to contest the next election. She said bullying and intimidation from both major parties. Your response to that was that's part of the rough and tumble of politics and she just has to roll with the punches, so to speak.
Yeah, look,
do you stand by those comments?
Look, sadly, when I meant that also, Julia, in her reasons why for leaving, she also said because of the change of Prime Minister. Now, when you throw all those things into the mix, look, I hope she might reconsider after a week or so. This is a tough game. Like, Pat throws a lot of things at me, and I throw a lot of things back at Pat. Some of the email and the correspondence that we receive from outside is very tough. Some of the media commentary is hard in this job. Like, things get taken out of context, spun and twisted the meanings around. It's a tough job. So I hope that Julia, when she sits down and she thinks through the week, she may reconsider.
Well, Pat, the same could be said for Labor. Of course, we saw how Emma Husser has been treated. Who knows? She may well reconsider stepping down. But would you agree it is part of the rough and tumble of politics? And are the women in both parties being treated fairly differently?
Well, I disagree to try and compare those two incidents. Like the Husser incident was subject to a full investigation about the various claims. I think there is a deep cultural issue within the Liberal Party. There's a deep cultural issue that led to this national embarrassment of overthrowing a Prime Minister only 2 years after an election. And secondly, they've got a deep cultural issue in terms of female representation. We're at 48% female representation, something I'm exceedingly proud of. The Liberals are around 20%, and that goes to the culture of their organisation and the culture of bullying and intimidation that we saw on display last week, where some blokes in the Dutton camp were clearly running around threatening pre-selections, forcing people to sign petitions.
Hang on. That's not what the allegations were. The allegations were not that.
They were the exact allegations.
They were not that. That is not what Julia Banks has alleged
well, others
whatsoever.
Have alleged that, Craig. Others have alleged that repeatedly to a number of news outlets, and we have to reflect on the cultures of the two major parties. We've learned from our past mistakes. On the leadership things, I'm not going to pretend otherwise. It was shambolic when we were in government. We changed the rules of the party so that is virtually impossible to be repeated. Our culture is very strong, and a big part of that is having close to 50% female representation.
Craig, Julia Banks had a career before politics. She would be used to rough and tumble, but there is obviously something different in politics. Why are we seeing that cultural problem in politics, and why are we not seeing our politicians lead in those areas?
Look, you're right. We have to lead. We have to show respect in our debates. I come in here and often get labelled, you're a dinosaur, you're a knuckle dragger. They're the barbs that get thrown at us. Now, it is a tough game. It shouldn't be like that. We should not attack the personal in this issue. Now, I hope Julia, when she sits and thinks about it, and I know it was, she was a good big supporter of Malcolm Turnbull. She was elected under Malcolm Turnbull. That she may sit down and reconsider, because the issues that she's fighting for are important, and I hope that she continues to represent those electors at Chisholm, hopefully after the next election.
But Craig, you've got to accept that having MPs in tears reporting to the Prime Minister that they were in tears and being intimidated and were really concerned. Linda Reynolds, for example, who's a very tough operator, ex-Army brigadier, made a speech in the Senate about the conduct last week, and I think it behoves all Liberal MPs to reflect on the behaviour they witnessed last week or participated in.
Well, Pat, I didn't see any bullying. There may have been some vigorous debates. but I didn't see anyone threatening anyone. I didn't see anyone bullying anyone. In fact, as Julia said, she said the bullying that she's experienced has been from both sides of politics.
More broadly, you've also lost Julie Bishop. How much of a loss is she to the party?
Well, I understand that Julie's going to continue to run maybe at the next election.
Yeah,
She's
but
still making
certainly in
her
a
mind up.
leadership role. She's not on there.
Look, she can play a big role from the backbench. That probably actually gives her more time to go around the electorates. Julie's very, very popular around the electorates. Now, if she's on the backbench rather than having her job as foreign minister, that gives her more time out to get help.
But she managed to do both quite adequately.
Well, she did.
People said it was a brilliant performance on many accounts, both as foreign minister, but also, obviously, in the amount of support she generates in the electorates she goes to.
Absolutely. As I said, that now gives her more time to get out and about in the local electorates.
We've also seen more controversy surrounding Peter Dutton this week, Craig. Was it wrong for him to overrule departmental advice on
really?
the au pairs?
I've seen some beat-ups in stories. Like, as Minister for Immigration, you have the ministerial discretion, which gets exercised in many cases. It was under the Labor Party, it was under Scott Morrison, it was also under Peter Dutton. Now, these au pairs or nannies, as I understand it, someone was actually a cousin coming to live with their cousin and was going to do a few jobs around the house as well. Now, if that is something that I see, the ministerial discretion should be used for, and I think he did exactly the right thing.
He said that it was he did this because it was in the interests of Australia as a humane and generous society. Why does that not apply to refugees as well?
Well, of course it does. It applies across the board. The humane and so-called humane and humanitarian issues about refugees. Remember, the previous policy Peter Dutton and Scott Morrison inherited under the Labor Party saw 1,200 refugees drown at sea. That was the policy that we inherited, and that was the mess that we've been fixing up.
The question is not the legality of the decisions, Pat. It's has he misled Parliament?
Well, it's beyond that. I think there's a real case about whether he misled Parliament when asked about it during question time. But let's concentrate on some facts. At least 2 au pairs were blocked at the airport because they'd breached their visas previously. They'd worked under tourism visas previously. Phone calls were then made by people with strong Liberal connections or police connections through the Queensland Police Force to Peter Dutton, to Peter Dutton's office. He then exercised discretion against the advice from Border Command to issue visas for these au pairs. There is a huge case to answer here. No one questions the legality of it because he does have that ability, but the question is about the judgment of it. Were there any other links between the families involved and Mr Dutton or the Liberal Party? And he hasn't made any full answer to this, and he should cooperate with the Senate inquiry. And you're absolutely right. This is a government that could have accepted the New Zealand offer to get all the children and families off Nauru right now. They've refused to do that. That is not humane. They're happy to play politics with refugees, but when it comes to au pairs for connected families, they're happy to wave them through. It's hypocrisy on a grand scale.
Right, we've got a lot to cover this morning, so we might move on from that topic and talk energy. Reports this morning in the Sydney Morning Herald about potentially a $15 billion trade deal with Europe at risk if the Paris Accord is not abided by and we don't see those emissions being cut. Are we putting that at risk with the government's policy on energy?
I'd be interested to see what the EU are doing with their trade deals with the USA. The USA...
Well, we're not talking about the USA.
Well, I know, but the USA has put it back. So what trade deals is that going to affect? And or even look at many of those EU countries, they're nowhere near their Paris targets. We had President Macron out early in the election. CO2 emissions in France actually increased 3% last year, much higher than Australia, even without the population.
But hang on, Pat, are you saying this is an empty threat?
Well, who knows what the threats are. The EU,
but do you maintain that Australia should withdraw from the Paris Agreement?
What we should do, we should have a full audit so we can explain to the Australian people what is actually required. And we need to do that across every sector of the economy. What do we need to do in agriculture, transport, commercial aviation, cement manufacturing, all the industries that we have? What will that cost and what will that require? And I think if you have that debate, people will be very concerned about how we can possibly achieve a 26% target is going to be hard. A 45% target, which Labor have, is going to be economy devastating.
This government this week walked away from any pretense of satisfying its climate change commitments, inadequate as they are. To have the energy sector that's a fully 1/3 of our carbon emissions say we're not worried about their pollution at all, we're not worried about that at all, we're signing the death warrant for this government's commitment to taking effective action on climate change. And the great tragedy, besides the impact on the environment, is that by having that uncertainty in energy policy, we won't get the new investment in renewables and other low emissions, which means that power prices will go up at the same time as pollution. This is a government that has zero credibility on climate change and energy policy, and our constituents will pay the price for that.
All right, we're almost out of time, but we did want to touch on another subject, which is not politics, believe it or not, but yesterday we saw the Catholic Church's response to the recommendations of the Royal Commission. Craig, they said that they would not break the seal of the confessional because that would undermine religious freedom. What's your reaction to that?
Look, the Catholic Church have really, if you could say, dropped the ball over many years when it comes to cracking down on pedophilia and child abuse. I'm not a Catholic myself, but I do have some concerns with that changing the laws on the seal of confessional. It could actually have the adverse consequences. Someone that's actually a perpetrator of a child sex offenders, I can't see them going into a confessional and admitting what they've done. So, I'm not sure. I'm not sure this is actually going to work, and it could actually have the adverse consequence. And whatever we do, I think it should be done in consultation with the church.
So you say the church has made the right decision?
Well, no, I'm saying that we should have consultation with the church on this issue. I don't think the government should come in over the top and put regulations in.
Pat, what do you make of that? And more broadly,
I think the Catholic Church's decision was an absolute disgrace. My home region of the Hunter Valley was the focal point, the locus for so much child abuse perpetrated by the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church. And for 30 or 40 years, the Catholic Church not only allowed this to go, they actively transferred priests around to avoid accusations being proven. We had Bishop Wilson found guilty of crimes in Maitland of knowingly not going to the police when he had accusations of child abuse. The Catholic Church's culture must change. This sends an appalling symbol that they consider respecting the rights of people confessing to pedophilia within the sanctity of the confessional more important than protecting children. I'm dead opposed to it. I think it's disgraceful, and they need to move on because ultimately too many families have been destroyed by this attitude.
Are you encouraged that the Catholic Church has accepted 98% of the recommendations from the Royal Commission?
That's a good sign, and I recognise and welcome that. But sadly, they need to take this step. My community won't stand for it. We've seen too much abuse with the Catholic Church turning a blind eye, and this is another step.
Pat Conroy, Craig Kelly, thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot.